they're going to mine.
So if we want to zero in on two words on this screen right here, private land, all right? The three most beautiful words in the English language in this country in our business is no federal nexus. If I ever start a rock band, that's what we're calling it. So this project, all of our permitting is driven exclusively by the state and by Pinal County. We do have some portions that are within the incorporated areas of Casa Grande, which are subject to planning and zoning rules, but for the most part, we're not spending 10 to 25 years bashing our heads in dealing with NEPA. And the interesting thing about it is on the other side of this project, just like Resolution, just like Copper World, just like any of the other mining proposals that you see, we still have to adhere to the same level of adherence to the Clean Water Act, Clean Air Act, all of the environmental regulations that cover this stuff. The only difference is the amount of time it takes to bring this stuff online.
So really we're looking at 172 million pounds per annum. And if you guys remember our PFS, we were at 18 years, now we're up to 31-year mine life. A lot of other things in here. We won't go into great detail, but you know, we're seeing 69% of Park Salyer is the project is 69% Park Salyer, 23% Cactus West, Cactus East is 6%, and then the stockpile is about 2% of our reserves. Yeah. So we're actually have a partnership with Newton, a Rio Tinto company.
That's without.
Oh, this is without Newton. Okay, perfect.
It'll be using the technique developed at Lower Chase for Morenci. It'll be using the Lower Chase operating situation I was involved with at Morenci.
See, and that's why we have Steve here. So really, it's going to put us on track to be right around the 5th largest producer of copper here in the U.S., just past Sarita. But it's going to be we're going to be really close with Sarita. And as long as Dan keeps on finding ore, we're going to increase that rate. So this is kind of the breakdown of what the operation will look like over the 30 plus years. Strip ratio overall is a 2.3 to 1. We got a better strip ratio at Cactus West because it's already primarily been mined out. We're looking at, let's see if I can get this to work here. This is our annual throughput and a mining cost of $10.51 per ton. Kind of what the pit operation will look like. We're going to be looking at underground operations starting at Cactus East somewhere in year 18, but everything's going to be driven with the open pits starting off. Annual revenue, $670 million. Life of mine revenue, $20.8 billion, and $7.3 billion life of mine cash flow. So what is next for us? Of course, we've put out the mineral resource. We put out a updated PEA. We've got metallurgy that's going on with ASCU and with Newton. We're going to be infill drilling the Mainspring and Cactus West deposits. And Cactus West is already currently being drilled, right, Dan? And then we're going to be starting a new feasibility or initiate the pre-feasibility. Pre-feasibility will come out in the first half of next year, possibly an early works program on getting the mine ready to go into production. We'll complete permitting. Then we'll go into a definitive feasibility study, and then that should be completed second half of 2025. And then hopefully a construction decision in 2026, with first cathode coming out late 2027, early 2028. And this is where we get into all the advantages of private land. Adam?
So I've worked on mining projects for, I don't even want to think about how many years now, every continent except for Antarctica. I have yet to find one with this kind of set of different factors going in its favor. Normally what we're doing is more kind of like peeling an onion or playing whack-a-mole, where you knock down one problem, another three pop up. This site really has a lot of opportunities, and I like to look at it, rather than peeling an onion, more like a layer cake. So in this sense, we acquired the site with sufficient water rights to be able to cover the life of the mining operation. To that, we didn't just stop at that. We kind of looked at some of the opportunities that we have, which, being adjacent to Casa Grande, we're next to a water treatment facility. Casa Grande currently pays to deal with their effluent. We've been working with the city on an arrangement to purchase effluent for them, gift them some of our water rights that they can use for future development, basically putting us on the path to produce the first pound of copper in Arizona's history without pumping a single gallon of groundwater. It's never been done. So we've really kind of started with how we can utilize this site from the end of mine life, and how we can put this together in a way that will leave this site in much better stead than we found it. Among some of the things that we've looked at, and we'll talk a little bit more about, is we're going to construct a viewshed berm. We've got houses that are along the eastern and northern side of our property. We're going to put up a 100-foot viewshed berm that'll take away the viewshed impacts there. And yeah, if you want to focus in on that, so that it'll run like right along here. Yeah. And the idea is we want our neighbors to not know that we're neighbors. And that's actually some of the feedback we've gotten from a lot of the folks who are in the area of this project, is we didn't even know you guys were there. And that's something that we really aim for. We have a community hotline. We established it right after we took ownership of the property. When people call that number, they're actually calling me. If they email the community email address, they're actually emailing me. If I exclude suppliers looking for work and people looking for employment, we've had a sum total of 3 phone calls since we launched it. So it's pretty cool.
Yeah. And one of those was wondering if we were blasting, because they thought they felt it.
They asked us if we were blasting, and that was an easy one. So, when it comes down to the economics of this, we've commissioned a number of different economic impact studies. Our latest one, which took into account the latest release of our PFS, but not the latest PEA, found that the economic impact of our project was going to be in the area of $15 billion. That's the equivalent of bringing a Super Bowl to Casa Grande every year for almost 4 decades. We've actually tried to make sure that folks understand this. If Travis, if you want to go to the next slide, we do polling every year, and we ask folks where they're at on this. Now, I've seen support numbers. I've been doing polling for most of my career in mining, in and around mining projects. I rarely ever see numbers this high in communities that don't have an existing mining footprint. So like, yeah, if you're polling Globe Miami, if you're polling Elko, you'll pretty much be in the 90s, but to be like this in a community where mining isn't the driving force of the economy is pretty high. And among people who identify, here's the partisan breakdown, 66.7% Democrat support. That's pretty high. So again, I kind of come back to, this is more of a layer cake opportunity. One of the biggest issues we pulled on was that water, and this is not unique to mining projects. It's actually one of the more common things is that people will care about water. We found out pretty early on that having a really tight water game was going to be our way to establish and maintain social license. That's why we've really kind of gone towards making sure that we're doing everything that we can to do that. We have a unique opportunity because of our power supply. We're connected to APS's grids. We already have high voltage power lines to site. We have a substation on site. And APS as a grid that has the largest nuclear reactor in the United States attached to it. So we've got a unique opportunity to be able to produce 100% clean power for this. We have a rail spur, easy access to the Union Pacific line, runs right along the highway just outside of our property line. And Travis, heap leaching,
been around forever. It's great, low intensity, low capital, low water use, low energy use. Every mine's pretty much using it now. So tried and true technology. And the other thing that I would say is for a site that was sitting dormant, that was a taxpayer liability to turn around and generate $15 billion, that's quite a story.
It really is. If we want to advance to the next slide. 2017, this site had money set aside in a bankruptcy custodial trust that had enough for the care and maintenance of the site, but not enough to close it, and there was no reclamation bond associated with it. When Arizona Sonoran's predecessor company came in, part of the deal was that they were going to have to engage in a full reclamation bond for the site, put it on track to go back into production. We're not having to deal with the federal nexus problems, the NEPA issues, the decades of litigation associated with it. The other unique opportunity that I'd like to kind of hone in here as well is we have a portion of the Park Salyer property, which is on Arizona State Trust lands, which for those of you who are familiar with that, the minerals are subject to a royalty from the state. When we did just a back-of-the-envelope calculation on the impact of that, we came up with, during the period of time that portion of the deposit would be mined, it would be the largest annual contributor to the trust. You just don't see things like that, and we think somewhere in the area of give or take a little bit, about $100 million to the trust. That goes straight to public education in Arizona. It's a big deal.
You want to do this? You want me to?
This is the Travis department.
Well, as you can see, we're pretty much permitted for Cactus West, Stockpile, Cactus East. We're currently right now in the middle of amending the aquifer protection permit to include the Park Sawyer deposit and also the industrial area to include the Park Sawyer deposit. Next year, we'll be going through and we'll be doing amendments to all of them as we fine tune what our mining method is and what our mining method is and what our footprint actually looks like. But because we deal only with the state, we have a very fixed timeline. So the Kaizen process with DEQ gives us a set number of days that they need to make a decision on our application. And it's not a if, it's a when, as long as you take and submit a complete application. And then future opportunities. You want this one, Adam? You want me to?
Why don't you go with the first two, and
Okay.
I'll jump in on the third.
So one of the things that we're looking at right now to help reduce both fugitive dust emissions and haulage is in-pit crushing and conveying. So being so close to a city like Casa Grande, dust is one of our biggest concerns, is becoming a neighbor that creates a lot of dust. We don't want that. And then we're also moving the Park Sawyer open pit centroid to the north. So we've got a gas line that needs to be moved, but we're looking to kick that out for many years down the road. And then we're also working with Newton. So
Yeah. How many people here are familiar with Newton? So for those who aren't, Newton is a joint venture with Rio Tinto. They're studying the ability to be able to do an oxide leach process on sulfites. It's really a game changer if we can get it off the ground. It's early days, but Rio Tinto's made a pretty significant investment both in Newton and now in Arizona Sonoran. They have a similar program going on at Johnson Camp in Cochise County. But today, how much is Rio invested now? More or less.
I think they're like an 8% shareholder.
Yeah. It's significant.
And then exploration upside, of course. The geologists are going to be drilling the Cactus West extension, the gap zone in between Park Sawyer and Cactus West, and then the northeast extension. So we expect that those reserves are going to keep on going up. So really, we're down to probably pretty much the last slides. These are just kind of like the highlights. Quality large copper porphyry project in a great location on private land. We've got really good economics right now with, a good IRR, a good payback period, and, a very low risk project being that it's a brownfield site. It's open pit. We've shifted away from the underground mining, state permitting, and our social license.
So one of the things I want to leave y'all with is this is just one opportunity out there. When you think about the old David Lowell quote about the best place to explore for new ore is in the shadows of an old head frame. Our country is littered with abandoned mine sites, hundreds of thousands of them. Not all of them are opportunities for reactivation, but even if you play the same exploration odds that you do every time one of us hits a stick into the ground, goes out and stakes a mining claim, 1 in 1,000. If 1 in 1,000 of those AMLs was an opportunity to be able to turn something around, produce materials that we need for modern day life, create economic returns that are enduring for these communities that they live in, and solve environmental problems in a real, lasting, impactful way. All we need is the help of 435 members of the United States House of Representatives and 100 members of the Senate delegation, or at least a simple majority. But next time you have an opportunity to bend the ear of your congressman, let them know Good Samaritan reforms are something that's important to you. This site is proof positive, and anybody who has been on the other side of this, and I've gotten into arguments with people who are on the other side of the Good Samaritan reforms, which I won't get too far down that rabbit hole. But I've said there's a proof of it that it works. Come out here and see it. It's 45 minutes from Phoenix, an hour and change here from Tucson. And it's a great opportunity to show what we can do when we put our caps on and really start looking at ways that the mining industry can solve modern day problems.
Well said.
Okay, am I turned on? Yeah. Okay, you confused me a little bit when you made a statement that no water was going to be pumped out of the ground, but then you had a slide that said you had 3,500 acre-feet coming from an aquifer below the basement fault, which is 1,500, 2,000 feet down there. Those seem to be contradictory.
Yeah, so that's actually our historic water rights that we have. So is 3,800 acre feet. Our goal is to not use any of that water, to use only effluent water. So we're still in negotiations. We're still waiting for the city to finalize our purchase agreement. So this water is just a backup.
So we have to be able to demonstrate when we're making claims to investors, to securities folks, that we have a plan to be able to handle it. And our hope is that we'll have something actually inked with the city here in fairly short order to be able to address it. And coming back to it, yeah, we do have water rights. We bought the site with water rights, which is not something that we have the luxury of in a lot of projects. But we got a unique opportunity here.
I have two more questions. I'll
Yeah.
try to be succinct. You could see in that picture of the old Sacaton pit, there's a lot of green water in there, and you could see a couple places where water was flowing in. Do you have any idea how much water is making into that pit?
So historic records from ASARCO shows that they were pumping about 30 to 50 gallons a minute. So it's not a lot of water that's coming in. It's a relatively dry pit. That's mainly kind of meteoric water that, because there was no, for the time that the mine was abandoned, a lot of the berms and a lot of the, drainages weren't well maintained, so it flowed into the pit.
Oh, the old ramp wasn't maintained at all. It was completely washed out the last time I was there.
I'm sorry, what was that?
That old spiral ramp that goes into the old pit. But that isn't my question. My question, and this is almost rhetorical, between Sacaton or Casa Grande and Stanfield, there's a lot of abandoned agricultural land, right? The water got sucked up by Maricopa County.
Right.
How are you going to distinguish between all of that dust and the dust that you guys create with blasting, with haulage, with all of your activities?
Well, we've got a couple monitoring points that are right close to us, and then ADEQ has a bunch of other monitoring points, and Pinal County has a bunch of other ones. And we're just going to have to visually do inspections all the time to make sure that we're creating as little dust as
you've got a
possible.
good baseline, and,
Right.
you're going to monitor.
We
Okay,
do,
thank
yeah.
you very much.
There's actually some emerging technology that deals with satellite imagery that can be used to be able to track fugitive dust and patterns and their sources of origin. And I think as we get closer to operation, looking at opportunities to be able to do that, because we want to demonstrate that we're doing everything that we can to keep that in good stead. When you have unadvantaged farmland around you, that kind of can create some issues associated with that. But we've been talking with some of the folks over in the material science department at ASU who are looking at different ways, especially for road dust suppression, that we can use some new organics to be able to limit the amount of time we have to roll water trucks over that.
Oh, boy. I've had some experience with that sort of stuff, and good luck scrubbing it off your pickup truck. Keep some SOS pads around. I can't resist one last question. When our colleague Bob Cummings wrote about Sacaton in the 80s, he had a fascinating story of brecciation. Have you guys that are exploring anything to add to that story?
Dan?
I'll come to you.
So the whole deposit's pretty much brecciated, and where it's not, it's silicified. Although typically where it's silicified, that's where we have the really good high-grade 2% chalcocite. So we're trying to get a handle on the brecciation. I think a lot of it has to do with the basement fault, which basically is the main structural feature in the district. You drive through drilled through that basement fault, mineralization just dies. And so anyways, we have a really great logger, Marty Rex, who's a local guy, worked at Ray, worked at San Manuel. And a lot of times he can't even figure out what the rock is. And so we have brecciated fragments within breccia. And so we have two lithologies. He calls it breccia. Drives us nuts. And
I know Marty probably drives you nuts in a few other ways too.
Yeah, the other one is fault and then breccia. So I would say 80% of the deposit is breccia. I'm going to nip a question in the bud. Stan was bugging me as far as...
Thank you.
Yeah, maybe you should ask the question, Stan. Go to the mic.
Well, we've been hearing this thing called the basement fault, and I have my obvious opinions on what it is, but I want to ask Dan what the basement fault is in its regional context, and is there any possibility that more ore at some point might be found in the footwall of the basement fault?
That's the $64,000 question, and we don't know how much movement is on the basement fault. And the party line is that it's a detachment fault, but I concur with your model. I think it very likely is a strand of the Maricopa thrust related to low-angle subduction in the late Laramide. But there's a lot of work that can be done, and there's probably a PhD dissertation in that, certainly a master's. So above the basement fault, we have Oracle granite and then various lithologies of Laramide units. And below it, it's Pinel schist and metagranite, probably Madeira granite, and sometimes different volcanic rocks. And at the basement fault, often there's a strange, dense andesite unit. And we have no idea what age this thing is, but it's associated with the basement fault.
Could it be a pseudo-tacholite?
I don't know. You'll have to come down.
Okay. Well, I do have one comment. It seems like you have completely different basement lithologies in the upper plate versus the lower plate.
Definitely.
And just to remove that overlap requires at least probably 20, 30 kilometers of movement just to get, and that's a minimum number. And our modeling suggests as much as 200.
So what's interesting is that they do not see it at Santa Cruz, just 3 miles to the southwest. And then it peters out, actually gets faulted off towards the I-10. And then you have the Laramide batholith at the Signal Peak granite. And some of the old cross sections say that that fault is up in the air over that. And then right on our property, it seems to be folded. It forms a keel-shaped structure that's northeast trending. And then towards Park Salyer, it broadens out, and it's more just dipping to the west to northwest. And we're not certain yet, but it appears to be cut by younger structures as well. And the old party line was, no, it cut everything, nothing cut the basement fault.
Okay.
Dan, I think that's more than a $64,000 question.
64 billion?
I'd like to ask, I think, two questions. One is, what's your relationship with Ivanhoe, if anything in terms of a business future with them? And then the second thing is, you were mentioning leaching of primary sulfides and the fact that that's progressing with other companies. And how do you account for recoveries from primary sulfides in terms of your balance sheet where you're reporting recoveries? Is that process proven enough so that you know how much chalcopyrite you're going to be able to leach over a given period of time, such that you can include that in your reserves? And what degree of certainty do you attach to that?
Well, I'm going to leave the second question for Steve. But the first one is, we have a really good relationship with Ivanhoe. Right now, we're just looking to help each other grow our projects. Ultimately, we realize that this is a huge district, and it's going to get a lot of eyes because of its size. If you were to combine our resources and their resources, you're looking at one of the largest untapped, unmined mining districts really in the world. We're not going to be the first because of resolution, but you're talking one of the top 20, and a strong relationship with them helps foster our understanding of our deposit and their deposit. So we work really hard at keeping this relationship going. Both they do and we do as well. And Steve?
Thanks. Chalcopyrite. We are working with Newton using the Newton conditions and been able to achieve 75% plus total copper extraction. In terms of material balance, the plan is to have a separate chalcopyrite leach pad, which is going to be north of the mill tails, and to the west will be the main oxide and secondary copper sulfides that are going to be over there. We are in the process of setting up some columns to operate under operating conditions that normal operating conditions will say. One example is Kennecott did work in the 90s on run-of-mine material at a 0.2 head, and in 600 days they got 28% recovery. Lower Chase was producing a lot more copper than what we had planned when we started it up. Unfortunately, when you leave Freeport, you don't exist. So I have no idea what they finally ended up with, but we'll see what these are. Run-of-mine 28%, we're crushing to 3/4 inch. You got more surface area, you have the potential for getting additional copper out of it. The secret on chalcopyrite is temperature. That's well known. You get above 50 degrees, you'll be able to get that rate increasing because the sulfur layer will stop being an impediment to
What's your reagent? What is your reagent?
sulfuric acid and blowing air. That'll be it. Now, I can't say what Newton's reagents are because they would take my firstborn child. But conventionally, it's just plain blowing air. When we started up Lower Chase, before the blowers came on, the heap was breathing. You talk to all the people who had worked these properties 50 years ago where they had hot dumps, and they knew they'd go and leach it, get the copper out, and then they would go back and run it on another one. Unfortunately, management would come in and say, it's making a lot of copper, pour the water to it. How do you put out a fire? You add a lot of water. And they killed the dumps. So one other interesting point on this ore body is we will not have an ARD issue. 90% of the material is Gila conglomerate. So we'll have the biggest sand and gravel operation in the world, if you want to call it that.
Do you feel that bacteria play a role?
You tell me how to get rid of the bacteria to 10 to the 6th, not the Lysol of 99.99%, then I know you know bacteria. You can't get rid of the babies, and they're going to be there. We had bioaugmentation circuits at Morenci. We were getting, every time they would raise a class of bacteria, the heap was too hot for that class. I was told there was no extreme thermophiles. We were getting zones of 60 degrees. You can't get rid of them. You operate your heap right, you're going to get a class of bacteria coming up. If you got sufficient pyrite, that's a fire. You got to have greater than 3-to-1 pyrite to chalcopyrite. Milt Wadsworth at the University of Utah, Chalcopyrite Institute. That's what you need to have. If you don't have pyrite, you're not going to get the fire. We got lots of pyrite.
What do you think is responsible for the widespread formation of atacamite in that environment?
We don't have atacamite. We're mainly carbonate.
Okay, Ivanhoe.
That's Ivanhoe.
Yeah,
Ivanhoe
okay.
has that. And I have some interesting ideas for that because it is so deep. But that's another time to talk. So atacamite's water soluble. I worked a project in Chile to where our oxide circuit was running 20 to 30 grams per liter. The sulfide circuit, once we got it down below 7, we had to import bacteria because of the atacamite. There was no native bacteria. Once we got it to 7 grams per liter, there was active bacteria. Once we hit 5 grams per liter chloride, the heat took off, and we were leaching copper like crazy. The general manager left. The chairman of the board decided to promote his best friend, who was the HR manager, and he combined the two ponds to save money and killed all the bacteria. Because all of a sudden you hit it with 20 grams per liter chloride. They can't handle it. A lot of operations are going for chloride leaching right now. Bacteria don't like chloride if it gets too high a level. So it's all chemical leaching then.
Thanks.
Okay.
I have a question from somebody online. They wanted to know what the thickness of the overburden here was.
Give it to Dan Domain.
So property-wide, it's about 100 feet of alluvium, which is granitic material that's just coming off the Santan Mountains. And then below that is the Gila conglomerate, and it's shallow to the south and deepens to the north. And it is variable, but the deepest interval of Gila conglomerate is over 2,700 square feet. And no upper plate at all. It just goes from Gila conglomerate to Pinel schist, dead Pinel schist, and that's located at the southwest end of the tailings facility. It's interesting that we're seeing horizons of rhyolite tuff. Sometimes we see basaltic horizons and agglomerates and lapilli basaltic tuffs, and they can be up to 200 feet thick. But they seem to be localized in basins, so it's not a good marker unit at all. I would say at Park Salyer, which is going to be the big pit that produces all the copper, it's probably from 500 to 800 feet deep of overburden, alluvium, and Gila conglomerate. I'd like to add too that I'm the kind of the computer guy of the geology department. The guys that call all the holes are the BPX Doug Bowden and Chris White, the chief geologist, chief mine geologist, and they should be getting all the credit for finding all the ore.
Thank you.
It's always a team effort.
Takes a village, folks.
Are there any other questions that you would like to ask these folks while we have them here? Are you guys going to take us on a field trip up to your plant some point?
Just let us know when you want to come.
Okay.
Yeah, for those really adventurous ones, we can go tomorrow. It's only going to be 111. No, come out and see us just when the weather's better.
We'll wait till the fall.
Yeah, we try to put on a good show. It's not the same thing that you'd expect to see from an operating mine, but we have lots of things for folks to get their boots messed up with. So come out and see us.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you. If